When a team of NASA scientists spends 11 years, $400 million, and burns a hole nearly 2 miles straight down through the oldest ice on planet Earth, and then the entire project goes silent overnight.
We take you live to the West Antarctic Ice Shelf, where a joint NASA task force is utilizing advanced drilling technology in their search for ancient ice samples.
Every press release deleted, every researcher reassigned, every photograph classified. You stop whatever you are doing and you pay attention. Because people do not erase nothing. Governments do not bury an empty hole. And NASA, the same agency that live streams rocket launches and tweets pictures of distant galaxies for fun, does not suddenly go quiet about the single deepest hole they have ever drilled into our own world, unless what came back up that hole was something they were never supposed to find. That is exactly what happened in Antarctica. NASA scientists finally opened the ice, and what they found down there did not just shock a few researchers in a frozen lab. According to the people who were there, it rewrote the timeline of the human race. It suggested that everything we have been taught about who built the first cities, who came before us, and whether we are even alone, all of it is wrong. If they are right, then the lie we have been living isn't a small one. It is the foundation that every history book on Earth is built on. And the deeper you follow this story, the more you start to understand something chilling. The lie was never the real problem. The real problem is what they found under the ice that forced them to lie in the first place. So let me tell you what happened when they opened it. For most of human history, Antarctica was nothing. A blank white nothing at the bottom of every map. A place too cold, too far, and too useless for anyone to care about. The first humans didn't even confirm it existed until 1820. No trees, no cities, no reason to go. Just 2 miles of ice sitting on top of more ice, sitting on top of rock that nobody had ever seen. And that, officially, is exactly why NASA went there. Not to study Antarctica at all. They went to practice for space. You see, the moons of the outer planets Europa around Jupiter and Enceladus around Saturn are buried under thick shells of ice with liquid oceans hidden underneath. If you ever want to find alien life out there, you first have to learn how to drill through miles of ice without contaminating whatever is below. And the closest thing on Earth to those frozen alien moons is Antarctica. So NASA's stated mission was simple and boring. Send a team to the most isolated drilling site on the continent, melt a clean borehole down to a subglacial lake that had been sealed off from the sky for 15 million years, lower a sterilized probe, take some water samples, look for a few microbes, and go home. A rehearsal for Europa. Nothing more. The science behind that is completely real, by the way. Beneath the Antarctic ice, there are nearly 400 lakes that have never frozen, kept liquid by the heat of the planet itself. The largest, Lake Vostok, is the size of Lake Ontario and has been sealed under the ice since before modern humans existed. Real scientists really have drilled down to these lakes. Real scientists really have pulled up living bacteria from water that hadn't touched the atmosphere in millions of years. None of that is a conspiracy. That is just Tuesday in Antarctica. So when NASA announced their borehole project, the world barely noticed. A few science blogs covered it. A documentary crew was promised access. The team posted cheerful updates about drill depth and ice cores. Everything was normal, transparent, and exactly as advertised for the first 10 years. And then the government got involved. And the moment the government got involved, everything that had been public went dark. Here is the first thing that doesn't make sense. A microbe survey project to scoop up some bacteria from a lake does not require a military presence. But in the final year of the dig, the personnel manifest at that remote station quietly tripled. Logistics flights that used to come once a month started coming 3 times a week. The documentary crew that had been promised full access had their contracts canceled and were flown home with their footage confiscated for review. And the lead glaciologist, a man who had given dozens of interviews about the project over the years, gave exactly one more and then never spoke publicly about Antarctica again for the rest of his life. That is the official version, a simple science mission. But the official version is always the version they want you to have. So let's ask the same question any reasonable person would ask. If all you found at the bottom of that hole was pond water and bacteria, why the soldiers? Why the confiscated footage? Why the silence? You do not classify microbes. You do not reassign a scientist's entire career over a water sample. You do that when somebody saw something they cannot unsee. And to understand what they saw, you have to understand what the ice was actually hiding, because Antarctica was not always frozen. That is not a theory. That is geology. Drill into the rock beneath the ice, and you find coal, which only forms from ancient forests. You find the fossils of ferns and trees. You find the bones of dinosaurs and the remains of temperate rainforests that grew there 90 million years ago, when Antarctica sat in a warmer part of the world and was green from coast to coast. The continent we think of as a dead white desert was, for most of its existence, alive. So the real question was never whether something could be hidden under the ice. The real question is, how recently was that land warm enough to live on, and who, or what, might have been living there when the ice came down and sealed it forever? When NASA's probe reached the bottom, it started answering that question, and the answers came in stages, each one more impossible than the last. The first thing the probe's sonar picked up at the floor of the lake was not the natural jagged rock you would expect. It was a line, a perfectly straight line, hundreds of feet long, running at a clean 90-degree angle into another straight line. Nature does not make right angles. Not like that. Water erodes things into curves. Wind rounds everything off. Ice grinds the world smooth. But down there, under 2 miles of frozen time, the instruments were tracing the outline of something with corners, foundations, walls, the unmistakable geometry of a city that had been built, not formed. As the probe's light swept across the lakebed, the shapes resolved into streets. Long avenues of cut stone laid out in a grid, the way you would design a planned settlement. Blocks, plazas. The collapsed shells of enormous structures, some of them the size of cathedrals, their stones so precisely fitted that you could not have slipped a knife blade between the joints. And running through all of it, channels, aqueducts, canals, a water system engineered by people who understood hydraulics, sitting at the bottom of a lake that had been frozen over since before our species learned to walk upright. This was a civilization, a real one. Advanced, organized, and unimaginably old. And the team realized they were not looking at a ruin from a few thousand years ago. The sediment layers on top of those streets told them the city had been abandoned and buried long before the first stones of any culture we have ever heard of were laid. This was not older than Rome. It was not older than Egypt. It was older than history itself. There is a name people have whispered for thousands of years for exactly this: a brilliant, advanced civilization that ruled in a golden age and then vanished beneath the water in a single catastrophe so complete that only a legend survived. Plato wrote about it 24 centuries ago and insisted it was real. He said it sank in a single day and night of misfortune. Everyone assumed it was a myth, a story, a moral lesson. But Plato also said it lay beyond the edge of the known world, in the far reaches of the great ocean, frozen out of reach. The team standing in that Antarctic station were now staring at sonar images of drowned stone avenues at the bottom of the world. And the word that nobody wanted to say out loud because saying it would end careers was the only word that fit: Atlantis. But here is the thing about finding Atlantis. The moment you accept that a lost super civilization really existed, you are forced to ask the next question. And the next question is so much bigger than the first. If they were that advanced, who taught them? And what did they leave behind? The probe kept mapping, and rising out of the drowned city, casting long shadows in the beam of the lights, were the structures the team would argue about for the rest of their lives. Pyramids. Not natural mountains that happened to look pyramid-shaped. 3 of them, arranged in a deliberate pattern, with 4 smooth triangular faces meeting at a sharp point, the same geometry as Giza, the same geometry as the pyramids of Mexico. The same geometry that shows up, impossibly, in cultures that supposedly never made contact across oceans they had no way to cross. And these Antarctic pyramids dwarfed all of them. The largest was estimated, from the sonar returns, to be bigger at the base than the Great Pyramid of Egypt, far bigger. Now stop and think about what that actually means, because the size is not even the shocking part. The shocking part is the timeline. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 4,500 years ago, and even today we cannot fully explain how human beings with copper tools and rope moved 2.5 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as a truck, and stacked them with an accuracy that modern construction crews struggle to match. We tell ourselves a story about ramps and manpower, because the alternative is admitting we don't know. But these pyramids under the Antarctic ice were not 4,500 years old. The sediment, the ice layers above them, the geology of the lake bed, the everything said they had been sitting in the dark for tens of thousands of years before Egypt existed, before the wheel, before agriculture, before any human being, according to the textbooks, was supposed to be capable of stacking one cut stone on top of another. And suddenly, a question that historians have quietly avoided for over a century became impossible to ignore. Why do the oldest cultures on every separate continent, Egypt, Mexico, China, Sudan, Cambodia, all independently decide to build the exact same shape, align it to the exact same stars, and treat it as the most sacred structure they could make? Mainstream history says coincidence. But what if it isn't coincidence at all? What if every pyramid culture on Earth was copying a memory of the people who built first, the people whose own pyramids now sat frozen at the bottom of the world? What if Egypt, the mighty Egypt we think of as the beginning, was not the beginning at all, but a faded echo of teachers who came before and then vanished under the ice? That is the moment the NASA discovery stopped being archaeology and started becoming something the human race was not ready for. Because a lost city you can rationalize. Pyramids older than history you can argue about. But the team's instruments weren't finished, because when they tried to scan the inside of the largest pyramid, the readings came back wrong. Not empty, not solid stone. The pyramid was generating power. The energy signature was the thing that broke the room. When the probe's sensors passed the base of the Great Pyramid, they registered a low, steady pulse of electromagnetic energy radiating from somewhere deep inside it. Faint, but unmistakable, and rhythmic a heartbeat. Whatever this structure was, it had not been built only as a tomb or a temple. It had been built as a machine. And after tens of thousands of years buried in ice and darkness, with no one to tend it, some part of that machine was still on. That is a problem. Because a stone civilization that drowns and dies leaves dead stone. It does not leave running technology. Technology that still works after 50,000 years is not the work of people who had ropes and copper chisels. It is the work of something with a science so far beyond ours that we don't have the words for it. And then the probe's camera caught the doors. Set into the rock face near the pyramids was an entrance, and it was not shaped like anything a human culture builds. It was an enormous octagon, 8 sides, perfectly cut, standing several stories tall, and around its frame were carvings, symbols, a written language, but not one that matched any of the hundreds of human scripts we have cataloged. And worse, the carvings were illuminated glowing faintly with their own light, in a sealed chamber where there had been no sun, no fire, and no living thing for longer than humans have existed. This is where the team realized the truth they had been circling for weeks. The drowned city wasn't just a human civilization that got too advanced. The people who lived there were not the architects. They were the inheritors. Something had come here first, built these machines, carved that language, raised those octagonal doors, and then either left or went deeper. The Atlantis they had found was a colony. And the colonists had not been alone. Because the final thing the sonar mapped, in the deepest part of the lake, beyond the city, beyond the pyramids, was a fleet. Rows of disc-shaped objects, metallic, undamaged by the millennia, parked in formation inside a vast carved hangar like aircraft waiting on a runway. Craft, ships. The kind of object that thousands of people across thousands of years have sworn they have seen streaking across the sky and again, rising out of the ocean near the poles. The kind of object every government on Earth officially insists does not exist. NASA had drilled a hole to look for bacteria. And at the bottom of it, they had found a hangar full of flying saucers, sealed under the ice, next to power plants disguised as pyramids, beneath the ruins of a civilization that was building starships when our ancestors were still chipping flint. Now you understand the soldiers. Now you understand the confiscated footage and the silenced scientist. Because there is no press release in the world that can announce we found their ships and one of them still has the lights on. But even the ships, was not the bottom of the hole. Because the deeper the probe went, the more the team realized the ice was not the floor of this story. The ice was the lid, and something below was still awake. To understand the last discovery, you have to go back almost 80 years to a man named Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Byrd was not a crank. He was one of the most decorated officers in the entire history of the United States Navy, a Medal of Honor, a Navy Cross, the only man ever given 3 separate ticker tape parades in New York City. When it came to polar exploration, there was no one alive with more authority. And in 1947, the United States sent Byrd to Antarctica at the head of something called Operation High Jump, a training exercise that, for some reason, required nearly 5,000 armed men, 13 ships, and an aircraft carrier. That is not a science trip. That is an invasion force. And it was sent to the one continent on Earth with no enemy to fight. The mission was supposed to last 8 months. It was abruptly canceled and evacuated after just a few weeks. And on one of his flights over the pole, Admiral Byrd's radio went dead for nearly 3 hours. No one could reach him. No one knew where he was. And when he came back, he had a story that he was ordered never to tell, a story that only surfaced in the form of a diary after he was dead. In that diary, Byrd describes flying north past the pole and seeing something that should not be possible. The frozen white below him gives way to green, a valley with a river running through it, forests on the mountain slopes, the temperature rising. And then a living animal that looked, he wrote, like a mammoth, an animal extinct for 10,000 years grazing in a warm valley at the bottom of the world. His instruments spun uselessly. His controls stopped responding. And ahead of him he saw a city, shimmering, built of something like crystal, glowing with color. Disc-shaped aircraft rose to meet his plane, took control of it, and landed it for him. He was escorted to meet a figure he called only the Master, who told him that his plane had been intercepted on purpose, that Byrd had entered the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the Earth, and that he was being sent back to the surface with a warning for all of humanity about the atomic weapons we had just begun to use. For 70 years, Byrd's diary has been dismissed as a hoax, a fantasy, the most decorated polar explorer in American history, written off as a fabrication because the alternative was unthinkable. But now put Byrd's account next to what NASA's probe was tracing at the bottom of that borehole, a warm region under the ice, kept heated by the planet itself, a crystal city, disc-shaped craft, an entrance, an octagonal door carved with a language no human ever wrote. Byrd said there was a way in a passage that led down, away from the surface, into a warm world below. And when NASA's probe pushed past the drowned city and into the deepest part of that lake, the sonar stopped finding a floor. It found an opening, a shaft, a tunnel, smooth-walled and impossibly deep, descending out of the bottom of the lake and down into the crust of the Earth, with warm air, in Antarctica, 2 miles down flowing up out of it. And carried on that warm air, from somewhere far below, the probe's microphones picked up a sound. Not the groan of shifting ice, not the rumble of geology, a low, rhythmic, repeating pulse. Patterned, structured, the same 8-beat rhythm as the symbols on the octagonal door. Something down there was signaling, and it was signaling up. I know how this sounds, so let me show you that the idea Byrd described and that NASA's probe seemed to confirm is older than NASA, older than Byrd, and was once taken seriously by some of the greatest scientific minds who ever lived. In the 1690s, Edmund Halley, the astronomer the famous comet is named after, a giant of the Royal Society, proposed in complete seriousness that the Earth is not solid. He argued it is hollow, a set of nested shells, one inside another, with space between them, and that those inner spaces could be lit and warm and capable of supporting life. This was not a tabloid. This was presented to the most prestigious scientific body on the planet. A century later, an American Army officer named John Cleves Sims Jr. expanded the idea, insisting that the hollow interior could be reached through great openings at both the North and South Poles, and he spent his life petitioning the government to fund an expedition to find them. For generations, believers have claimed that this inner world is home to the survivors of lost civilizations, to beings far older than us, and that the polar openings have been deliberately hidden from the public. It was filed away as pseudoscience and laughed out of the room. But every legend of a hidden world, from Agartha to Shambhala to the underworld of a dozen ancient religions, describes the same thing. A warm, advanced realm beneath our feet, reached through a doorway at the ends of the earth. And now, a $400 million NASA borehole had drilled straight down and found a warm shaft beneath a crystal and pyramid city full of ancient craft, with something alive at the bottom of it broadcasting a rhythmic signal upward. Halley and Sims were laughed at for 300 years. But the only people in a position to actually test their theory had just gone completely, suspiciously silent. So why don't you know any of this? Why isn't it on every front page on Earth? Because Antarctica is the most legally and politically locked down place on the entire planet, and almost no one stops to ask why. In 1959, at the absolute peak of the Cold War, when the superpowers could not agree on anything, when they were aiming nuclear weapons at each other's cities, the United States, the Soviet Union, and a list of rival nations all sat down and, with stunning instant cooperation, signed the Antarctic Treaty. Overnight, an entire continent was placed off limits. No military activity, no resource extraction, and, conveniently, no ordinary human beings allowed. Think about how strange that is. Nations that would not share a dinner table somehow agreed, immediately and permanently, to wall off the one continent none of them was supposed to care about. You cannot simply book a flight to the interior of Antarctica. You cannot wander where you like. Access is controlled by national programs and intelligence interests, and the handful of tourist cruises that exist are kept to a tiny, carefully managed sliver of coastline. Everything you are shown has already been decided in advance to be safe for you to see. What kind of empty, useless wasteland requires a treaty signed by every major power, enforced for over 60 years, to keep the public out? You do not build a fence that big around nothing. You build it around something. And the people who built it have had a very long time and a very good reason to make sure that you never find out what. Now, I have done this long enough to know I owe you the other side. So let me be the skeptic for a moment, because there is a real one to be. There are people who will tell you, calmly and correctly, that every single piece of this has a boring explanation. The straight lines and walls on the lake bed, sonar artifacts and natural rock formations. The human brain is wired to see patterns and faces in random noise, and it does it constantly. The pyramids? There genuinely are pyramid-shaped peaks in Antarctica, and they are completely natural wind and freeze-thaw erosion carve mountains into surprisingly clean triangles all over the world. The energy readings and the strange sounds, geothermal activity, shifting ice, and the groans of a glacier under pressure, which really do produce eerie, rhythmic, almost musical tones that scientists have recorded for years. The Byrd Diary? Almost certainly a forgery written decades after his death, full of details that don't match the historical record, and Byrd, remember, was also famously credited with reaching the North Pole first, a claim that was later seriously challenged. People exaggerate. Journalists sell papers, and the cold, the real, brutal Antarctic cold, makes equipment malfunction in ways that look like sabotage, but are just physics. Every part of this story has a debunking. I want you to know that, because I am not here to lie to you. But here is the one thing the skeptics have never been able to explain away. If it was all bacteria and pond water, if the bottom of that hole held nothing but rock, then there is no reason, none, for what actually happened next. The borehole was sealed. Not capped for the season, the way scientists normally close a site they intend to return to. It was filled. Pumped full of material and permanently plugged, the single most expensive borehole NASA had ever drilled, abandoned forever, within weeks of reaching the bottom. The station was decommissioned. The $400 million of research was reclassified. The ice core's 11 years of the most valuable climate data on Earth were transferred to a facility that does not appear in any public directory. And the lead scientist, the man who had spent a decade of his life talking openly about this project to anyone who would listen, gave that one final interview. In it, a reporter asked him a simple question. After all those years, what did they find at the bottom? He was quiet for a long time. And then he said only this. He said that some doors are frozen shut for a reason. that the ice was never a problem to be solved. The ice was a seal, and that the most important thing his team learned down there was not what they found. It was that whatever they found had been waiting, that the signal coming up out of that shaft was not an echo and was not a glitch. It had changed when the probe arrived. It had gotten faster. As if, for the first time in 50,000 years, something at the bottom of the world had noticed that the lid had finally been lifted, as if it knew the door was open. And then he stopped talking about Antarctica for the rest of his life. So let me leave you with the same handful of facts that I cannot make fit together, and you can decide for yourself. The most decorated explorer in American history described a warm, living world with a crystal city beneath the South Pole and was ordered to stay silent. Every major nation on Earth, at the height of mutual hatred, instantly agreed to seal that continent off from all of us, and has kept it sealed for over 60 years. NASA spent a fortune and a decade to drill the deepest hole in their history into the oldest ice on the planet, and the moment they reached the bottom, they plugged it, classified it, scattered the data, and silenced the man in charge. They told us they were looking for microbes to practice for a mission to the moons of Jupiter. Maybe that's true. But you do not send soldiers to guard pond water. You do not erase 11 years of work over a water sample. You do not seal a door unless you are afraid of what is on the other side of it. NASA scientists finally opened the Antarctic ice, and what they found down there was so far beyond what any of us were prepared to accept: a drowned civilization older than history, pyramids that were really machines, a fleet of craft that were never built by human hands, and a warm passage leading down into a world we were promised did not exist, that they did the only thing a frightened government has ever known how to do. They closed it again, and they hoped we would never ask what was knocking from the other side. If all of that is just a coincidence, the diary, the treaty, the soldiers, the silence, the sealed hole, and the signal that sped up the moment we arrived, then I have to tell you, that is an awful lot of coincidence, don't you think?